Hello everyone and welcome back to Rolling Through Negotiations. We've got with us one of the co-founders of Sprintlaw, Tomo Hachigo. And I think that one of the powerful things that Tomo shares in this episode is the place of empathy when working with clients, when working in your business, when negotiating as well. And so I think you're really going to love this discussion because we go into empathy and much more. But before we get into it, I would just like us to acknowledge the traditional custodians of these lands. Let's pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'd like to acknowledge the Ghana peoples whose land we're recording this episode from. Let's roll. Tomo, welcome to Rolling Through Negotiations podcast.
Great to be here.
Oh, actually, before we started recording, I asked you, Tomo, how do I pronounce your surname? And I'll have my best go at saying it as Hachigo.
Yeah, perfect. That's great. Yeah.
It reminds me of a Japanese, it might be a Japanese word or a proverb or something that I've heard. It's something like hachibum, meaning you don't eat until you're over full. Just sort of let the food get in that nice spot in the palate and then you rest.
Exactly. Yeah, it's hara hachibun me, which is you only eat till you're 80% full. And hachi means it's the number 8. And the Chinese characters for my surname, the hachi is 8. So it's kind of related.
But it's really interesting. One of the reasons why I thought it'd be fantastic having you on this podcast, Tomo, is not only because of your amazing legal mind and what you bring as a person, but there'd also be an amazing story of self-realization for you, I can imagine, because you've got Japanese heritage, you were born in Australia, and then this self-realization that comes with then being on Japanese soil and learning what Japanese culture is about, and through that probably learning more and more about who you are. Tomo, can you explain a little bit about that journey and the story and perhaps even any experience that comes to mind that fits in with this?
Yeah. My background, I grew up in Sydney, and about a year ago I moved here because for family reasons. And it's basically the first time I'm living in Japan. Although it's interesting you say that I'm kind of almost rediscovering, but at the same time I'm not really, because I'm quite familiar with Japanese culture. And I've always been, and this is probably a fairly common experience that a lot of particularly second generation migrants have in a place like Sydney. For me, it was kind of like not as shocking, and the rediscovery was kind of more very specific things than I say something you might imagine. And I know there's, if you're maybe like third, fourth generation and a bit further removed, I think it could be more of a surreal experience. But yeah, for me, it was kind of like quite a familiar culture, and I speak the language fairly well. And so that's been my journey. So I think that's like quite specific to my experience. Yeah, that's kind of, I suppose, like my starting point.
So I think this is a beautiful part of Australia's diversity, the fact that we've got so many people from all different places. What I'm wondering as well, though, given the little bit more explanation you've given about your story, Tomo, is whether there's been any experiences that you've discovered while being back and being on Japanese soil that has given you a greater appreciation for Japanese culture and perhaps even who you are from the opportunity of being there.
Appreciation. To be honest, it's actually the opposite. I mean, and not in a particularly negative way, but I think when you grow up away from that heritage, you tend to romanticize, all the cool things about it, particularly, Japanese culture. There's a lot of, from the outside, there's a lot of cool things that are quite famous, but once you're in it, you realize that it's not all perfect. And I see this a lot these days. Like in Japan, there's a lot of tourists from all over the world. I see a lot of Australians all the time, and there's this kind of, I found, like, among travelers, there's like this romanticization of Japan and being perfect and all that. and it really isn't, and that's been kind of um and again, I don't say it in a negative way because I think it's all those imperfect parts that make a culture whole. Same with Australian culture or any culture. I think it's the kind of good and bad, and I suppose going back to your question, maybe I do appreciate all of those things and just the kind of nuances in the culture.
Yeah, and because I think that perfection doesn't exist within any single person, let alone a nation. Tell me if this is right or wrong here, Tomo,
Mm-hmm.
because I feel like sometimes Japanese people do such a fantastic job in maintaining culture, in doing the best they possibly can to achieve the high standards. And I love the Japanese principle of Kaizen, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And these incredibly high standards can sometimes mean suppressing the shadow. And that's trying to hold back the imperfection, but it's inevitably going to come out one way or another. Do you think that is part of the challenges that Japanese people and Japanese culture faces?
Yeah, I mean, as a consumer, as a customer, it's amazing here. Everything
Mm.
is of a high standard. Like you go to any shop, any service you receive, it's like great. But behind all that, very hardworking people, often doing stuff that is like not that necessary, right? And you see the side effects of that. Like, every day you catch a train, everyone looks so tired, and particularly in Tokyo, where I live, everyone looks quite stressed out, and it's probably because of those high standards. So, I think a bit of balance is good. And I come at it from a different perspective, like having grown up in Australia where things are a bit more relaxed, maybe sometimes too relaxed. But yeah, I think balance is key, and yeah, I do feel like maybe that's lacking sometimes here. But at the same time, there is something beautiful about that commitment to the high standards and um, making sure that everything is always at that level. I think there is something quite beautiful about that.
Yeah, and then also with your hat on as a co-founder of Sprintlaw,
Mm-mm.
operating and owning your own business, are there principles that you've seen throughout the way Japanese people conduct business that can apply, for example, into providing legal services for clients and serving your own customers in Australian businesses, that if a law firm, for example, was to adopt some of these Japanese business-based principles, service could be delivered a lot better?
Yeah, I think I don't know if this is particularly Japanese, but um I find Japanese service culture particularly is there's a big awareness of um risk and having foresight and also like general social awareness. So um that's just part of the culture. I find like everyone's quite in a way thoughtful. Like everything is like quite thoughtful, and they're always like trying to minimize surprises and um and thinking ahead. So I think when it comes to businesses, and particularly where what we do in the services industry, right? Having that level of empathy and thoughtfulness, and sort of trying to predict what the pain points of a customer might be, I think that's something probably the Japanese do quite well. And it's actually one of our, we got five values at Sprintlaw. One of them is deliver with empathy, and that's all about not just having nice feelings for other people, but also just kind of having that foresight and being proactive and thinking about the customer journey and making things easier. And I think that's good business practices because, if you're trying to sell something to someone, making it easier for them to buy it is probably a good idea. But I also apply that, and we every time we onboard a new staff, we talk about our values, and when we talk about deliver with empathy, we use the word customer, but we also, customers could include your colleagues, right? So, whenever you're delivering some work for your manager or if you're providing instructions to a junior, whatever it is, having that empathy and thoughtfulness to make it easier for them to give you what you want, I think is kind of good practice. Just smart and it's efficient, and I think it makes it for a better workplace. So yeah, I don't know if that's particularly Japanese, but that's something I've noticed that people here do well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that empathy definitely is an incredible value for negotiations, for servicing clients, for doing business. I think sometimes empathy and vulnerability can be well connected. And I think that if people understand that you're personally being vulnerable and you're also being empathetic towards their own position, then you can build these personal relationships, and that can really help you get win-win outcomes in negotiations. And sometimes being empathetic and showing that you care for the other person does take a bit of vulnerability. But I think that if we can be empathetic, it can really shift the goalpost from being really transactional into human-based and connected.
Personally, I agree with what you said. Like, I think a bit more of yeah, I don't know if it's vulnerability or a bit of kind of skin in the game gives each other trust. I think that's a pretty important part of any sort of negotiation or business practice.
And what's it like being overseas and servicing clients in different nations? Do you feel that the way the world is at the moment and with technology, you can equally perform the same high standard from everywhere, or do you think that there's some challenges still?
So for our business, Sprintlaw from day one in 2017, we've always operated as a distributed workplace in that every staff member can be wherever. Now, it just happened to be that most people lived in Sydney, Melbourne, or one of the cities in Australia, and that's probably got to do with culturally and just the people we knew, the network, and all that kind of stuff. But in practice, like we didn't really have an office. Like we had co-working spaces that we rented out, and people go there socially and that kind of stuff. But in terms of the actual work, we're location neutral. So um, in a sense, like we've always had clients from even like all over Australia. We had because we're an online law firm. So in that sense, actually, it doesn't really matter where you are. And so when I moved here, nothing really changed because I'd always worked like this anyway. I just had a computer screen and good internet. And yeah, I work from home like 99% of the time. And basically just some social events where, we have two a year where we fly everyone from all over Australia to like a party location and we just have a good time. But other than that, the work itself can be from wherever. And that's so ingrained, I think, in our culture that sometimes like we're all working from the same co-working space and we have a meeting. And then let's say there's like six participants in the meeting, three of them are in the same room and three of them are somewhere else, which is completely normal for us. All the three people in the same room would have a webcam and Zoom screen in front of them. And it's kind of like even if you're in the same room, you're communicating through that sort of web interface, which um this has become so normalized for us that it doesn't even if you're in the same room, you're kind of almost like working remotely, So that's kind of been our culture. So from that perspective, like to answer your question, like it doesn't really change anything, hasn't really changed anything in terms of work for me. But what has changed is kind of the things that you mentioned, like when I step outside, it's Tokyo and there's like convenience stores and I'm buying a drink from a convenience store. That's like so different to like what it would be like in Sydney. So I'm picking up these little observations that yeah have absolutely affected the way we make decisions in the business. Yeah.
I can really connect with the description you gave because I work mostly from home these days. And I think that what's really interesting is that from a negotiation perspective, from a connecting with people perspective, doing things online can be more efficient and bring better outcomes that
Mm, mm,
wouldn't otherwise be achieved through face-to-face type arrangements.
mm, mm.
As we go into negotiations, Tom, I'd love to ask you a couple of questions to do with
Sure.
negotiations. What are some techniques that you like to use when you're negotiating, and why?
Hmm. I don't know if it's a technique, but I'm the kind of person that um, when it comes to negotiating, I just try and find the win-win. It's very simple, but um, and that means you just got to listen and not just kind of listening to what they're saying, like getting a full picture of who they are as a person and understanding what motivates them. And that's probably my general starting point. Now, that's if the outcome, well, that's if the win-win outcome exists. Now, sometimes that doesn't exist, and in that case, you have to kind of work with that. But um, yeah, I don't really, I probably don't really spend. I haven't really analyzed my negotiation. I'm probably more of like not a particularly confrontational person, so I just like to kind of have things resolved in a way that's happy. Everyone's happy. That's probably my approach to negotiation. Yeah.
It's awesome hearing you explain this, Tomo, because a couple of things that I pick up from this is, number one, you're probably an excellent listener. And
Oh, my wife might differ on that, but
but that's part and parcel, right? She wouldn't be doing her job if she agreed on that one. And I also feel for her in being married to a lawyer, because I think that being the spouse of a lawyer would be very difficult as well. And when you spoke a moment ago about win-win, Tomo, I think that when it comes to negotiating with your spouse and with your wife, I think that the win-win doesn't necessarily require the level of logic or what you would think would be logical, whereas it seems to be a different arena in a business or legal environment. And lawyers will often look for what is right, what is correct. But then in the reality of life, the reality of family, being quote unquote correct is not necessarily the loving way to go about doing something.
Yeah, I think that's not just in day-to-day life. I think even in business, you know, people think they're being logical, but actually oftentimes driven by very personal, subjective things that are not very rational. And I think that's just part of being human.
Yeah, I think
So
what you're
yeah.
speaking about here as well is emotion. Often in business, people can think that they're being completely logical about doing things,
Mm.
but actually they're being very emotionally driven.
Yeah, and I find particularly men are bad at recognizing that they're being emotional.
Mm.
Um, they think that what they're saying is rational when it completely isn't. I find that that's a common thing.
Absolutely. And I think that it's really interesting because if you listen to a lot of advice that's out there these days, there can be a lot of formulaic ways of describing things. So something that comes to mind, for example, is setting a task list. If you read a book by an expert on setting task lists, I can imagine they give you this sort of formula that sets out how to prioritize things and how to
Mm.
put things into categories and all these kinds of things. Often we can think, oh, it's logical, it's the next thing on the plate, whatever. But there's, I believe, a real emotionally driven reason for us picking up and doing that next task, the next thing. I think you hit the nail on the head when you speak about the emotions and the lack of logic, even though we sometimes think that we're being purely
Mm.
logically based in doing things. And this is also something that can apply really well in negotiations. I think that you were speaking before about in negotiations, you like to find out who the person is and what they're about, what's really driving them. And sometimes that means really listening into their emotions to understand the emotional drivers and connecting with those in that negotiation process.
Yeah. Um, yeah. Just on the, I mean, on the task list, and I think naturally we always pick the things that are kind of fun and easy to do. But if you just keep doing that, then you'll get nothing done, right? So I always have to, I mean, I've kind of gotten into this rhythm where I always have like a goal, overarching goal or purpose in mind. And when it comes to business, like for Sprintlaw, we have a mission, and our mission is to make legals simple and accessible for small businesses, right? So I find that it helps to have that kind of mission always as like the North Star, and everything you do has to be contributing to that. So, when you have these little kind of emotional reactions to tasks that you don't want to do, you just got to remind yourself, well, why is it that we're doing this in the first place? And um, it's because you start small. You want to get this feature out there onto the platform that you're building, so that it's easier for clients to access X, Y, and Z. And as a result, we're fulfilling our mission as a company of trying to make legals simple, right? But that's the kind of like way that I've just become accustomed to think. And I suppose like when you do that, you day to day you have these kind of emotional reactions to things that you don't want to do, but you just got to kind of fight that, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah, or do even then emotions come into play? So, for example, with the vision that you've shared, making legals accessible and simple to understand for small businesses.
Mm.
And so if you made a decision or did an action that wasn't in alignment with that purpose, then you probably would get a negative emotion. And so I wonder if then through the decision making, the actions that you're taking, the steps you're taking, it's still being in alignment towards congruence with the positive emotion.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's that's probably why we do this, like set like a purpose and a mission, because it guides us in the right direction. And um yeah, I think that's really important that you know where you're going.
What are some positive ways that you negotiate with yourself to bring forward the best version of Tomo?
Do I negotiate with myself? I've never thought about it in this way. This is
Always.
really interesting, and I probably do. I'll have to reflect on this as I speak. It's funny. I think I generally live on like I don't know if I'm particularly impulsive, but I do follow my instinct quite a bit. Um, and so, but there's probably some, negotiation that happens before I reach that, but it probably happens in a split second, right? Like, I mean, the only thing I can think of is like, what do I want to eat today? And that's that's the kind of negotiation that happens every day. But like when it comes to the big decision, I don't know if I see it as negotiating with myself, because at the end of the day, like I think I want to do what I want to do. So we're actually on the same team. It's kind of weird. I'm talking about myself from myself, but like I don't
Like one of
really.
those cartoons, Tomo, with the
Yeah,
good guy and the
yeah,
bad guy sitting on the
yeah,
shoulder.
yeah. I rarely find myself in conflict with myself. Yeah, I don't know
Awesome,
if
man. I
that's
think
weird.
no, but no, I think maybe you could say the weird part about it is the question about an assumption of negotiating with yourself, and that's so easily spoken on the podcast because I've said it quite a few times. Because
Yeah.
a lot of people haven't really thought about the negotiations that happen within
Mm,
ourselves,
mm, mm, mm,
and it's not something that we probably think about unless you put on the spot, ask that specific question. But I also appreciate in your answer, you said about following your instinct. And
mm.
so through that comes some great alignment and you're having this instinctual understanding and basis for the actions you take, the decisions that you make. And the negotiation with ourselves, I think, happens, for example, the alarm goes off. It's time to get out of bed. Do
Mm.
I press the snooze button? Do I scroll the feed? Do I get up right away? In a sense, you could say that in itself is a negotiation in that decision-making process. And perhaps every decision that we make in some form or another does involve an element of a
Yeah.
negotiation. But when you say instinct, I think that's a really powerful answer because most people, when they become successful in things, become more and more in alignment in who they are, what they're about. They become clearer in the actions, the decisions, and there's a real instinctual basis to all this. And so I think that your answer in terms of following
Mm,
instinct is a really powerful answer that people can use and develop in trusting themselves and following their own instincts in terms of that real deep core feeling, what is right and what is wrong in the decision-making process.
yeah, I think you're right. Like the the older I get and the more experienced I become, the easier it becomes to make decisions and 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 quickly as well. And you also realize how important it is to do that. And yeah, I find that maybe, when I was 10 years younger, I'll be maybe I don't know if you call it negotiation, but you'd be kind of umming and ahhing about a decision for much longer, and you just learn that it's much better to quickly get that decision out of the way. Yeah.
Yes. And I think sometimes that can come to how big are priorities you're setting for yourself
Mm,
and the level of decisions that you're applying to yourself on a daily basis. Because I think that when you have change the world type decisions to be made,
mm,
you're
mm.
going to be focusing on them a lot more than, for example, what color shoes will I wear today? As an example, for some people,
Right,
the
right.
color of the shoes might be really important and big decisions, but I'm just trying to use them as examples. And I think that if we can focus on the bigger, more impactful items, then the smaller stuff will typically take care of itself in that process.
Mm, mm.
You mentioned a little bit about growth that's taken place, for example, over the past 10 years in terms of the way you're
Yeah,
able to make
yeah.
decisions, say. Through that, I'm wondering if you have ever had a negotiation that went wrong or wasn't even the outcome that you were wanting at the time, but it might have in the end turned out right.
So this is kind of more of this happens all the time, which is when we have any client issues, right? And often, someone might leave a negative review on Google, or we've got a rating system for our clients that they can tell us if they had a bad experience, like they can log it onto our platform and then we act on it. And what I've always found is, well, first of all, most lawyers don't really have that kind of infrastructure set up for clients to give feedback, I find. I mean, Google Maps and Google reviews, they exist, but I've seen a lot of lawyers who get negative reviews. They just argue on the platform. And you know, whereas for us, like we always see it as like an opportunity to engage with the feedback, right? And um, there's this picture that we always draw for our staff. That's like, imagine like the y-axis is like how satisfied or how loyal the client is, and the x-axis is like time, right? So as time goes on, clients might like what you do, and then there might be a service failure here, right? And then we see that as an opportunity to then turn it around and get them to be even more loyal, right? Whereas if that failure doesn't happen, that line is a bit more linear, and clients might be happy, and but they might be happy but not extremely happy. So it's this kind of that failure, that bad experience the client had, is I see it as an opportunity to, that's I suppose like a something that went wrong. And there could be reasons like, your lawyer might have had a bad day and they were being rude to the client, or some feature didn't work on the platform, whatever it is, right? But then if you then get onto the phone and phone that client and be like, hey, what's up? Like, why did you leave a bad review? Often I find that they just want to be heard. And then you give them resolution. And we've had so many examples where they'll be like, wow, you guys are so different to every other service provider. Thank you for hearing me out. I'm going to change my review from a 1 star to a 5 star. And by the way, here's more work that I want you guys to do. So
Yes.
that's kind of like that's the thing that happens on the daily, I suppose, like things that go wrong, but then you just turn it into an opportunity. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, that's the
I
example
love your
I thought of.
humility, Tomo, because
Yeah.
as you speak this example, I think it's such a fantastic example, and it really does highlight an example of what you were saying before in terms of one of your values as a team, as a firm, is that value of empathy and really understanding where the client is coming from. And I think that that communication piece is a really strong, powerful, important part of a negotiation process, so that when we can communicate well with the empathy that you've spoken about, that can really help overcome challenges and get better outcomes in negotiations as well. It's been awesome having you on the podcast, Tommy, and I'd love to ask you this final question. Who's your favorite celebrity or famous person or influencer or movie star or sports star? Who's someone that's sort of in the public eye that you think's pretty cool?
That's an interesting question because I don't really. This kind of probably reflects who I am. Like for me, like there's no like one concept resolves all. You know what I mean? Like I feel like you just got to learn little bits from so many different things. So I find these kind of questions always so hard to answer. I know this is like not a probably not the purpose of the question,
No, but there's
but
authenticity in you finding it hard to answer
yeah,
because, for example, earlier there was a question about, what's the techniques you like in negotiations, but you are coming from more of a place of authenticity. Yeah, I feel for where you're coming from in terms of the challenges in answering this kind of question. So that's why I was thinking, actually, for this last one, if there was a musician that you like, then I can ask you, if you were to sit down with this musician, what's something about life that you would ask them and why?
I mean my all-time favorite musician is D'Angelo, who actually recently passed away, so I won't get to have that sit down chat with him, but I think it's the I like him and his music because he makes very beautiful things, and it's like, how do you make that beautiful thing? That's probably the question I'd ask. But then again, it's like his answer would probably be like, it's just bundle of his experiences in life, you know. So I think there's a consistent value that I have, which is to do with openness, right? I think it's really important that people are able to be authentic, and I encourage that in our company, and I encourage that in all the dealings I have with people that I have in life. But I think most of my thinking, and I suppose it's kind of my life philosophy in general, is I think it's important that we're open to a lot of different ideas and to different ways of thinking. And at the same time, I really place a high value on authenticity. And that's only possible if people, everyone has that same openness. Otherwise, you can't have one person being authentic and a million other people just scared of offending that person. That's kind of um, that's not really a good outcome in my opinion. So I think if there's sort of one thing that I wish there was more of is people are more open to accepting different ways of thinking and different ways of going about things. And I think that's true diversity. And I see today, particularly like around the world, there's too much of a very kind of narrow-mindedness and on sort of all spectrums of the equation. I find that everyone is very kind of siloed into their own little tribes, and I don't think that's very healthy for society. So I think if there's anything that I'd like to see more of, it's that openness and I suppose like not being quick to judgment. That's something that I've always valued and I'd like to see more of. Yeah.
That's awesome, Tomo. I think that your authenticity has definitely shown in this podcast, your message, and it's probably also, as you've said, a cornerstone in terms of how you go about business and the work you do with the team at Sprintlaw. It's been amazing connecting with you today, and I really appreciate the message and the authentic conversation that we've been able to have. And I think that our listeners are really going to enjoy and get a lot out of. And so remember, guys, if you've liked this episode, press the like button and subscribe to Rolling Through Negotiations podcast so we can keep on bringing you more great episodes just like this one. Us.